that it did start happening more because it's such a good food, and I will get into a bit more of the details of the bread, but it is really interesting that especially in Canada I find there's this thing that carbs, it's just bad. Everything carbs is bad, and I think it's just everything that has flour has gotten a bad reputation, or I'm not saying it's like you should eat 10 of these per day. Some people eat it in one day, but it is a healthier version of your carbs, right? So I sell these breads to people in Sycamore where I live, and I always try and say, when people say, oh, I have to get off those carbs, I'm like, why don't you get off all the other carbs and leave this in, right? Anyway, I'll backtrack a little bit. My name is Nicole, and we live in Sycamore. We have a little homestead, a little farm there on 15 acres, and we moved there during COVID, and when, I don't know, no one was buying houses, and we just okay, that seems right, and we moved there. And from there on, it just our whole life started changing, which wasn't really the intention to have animals and start this farm, but there we went, and now we have a few goats and 40 chickens and all these things, which is wonderful. And when Melanie started doing this last year, I was here for the sourdough talk, and I just love what they do with showing everyone how you can do so many things, whether you have a homestead or not. There's so many things that you can already do that don't require the land or the animals. There's just so much you can do in a mason jar. That is a simple start, and I really appreciate all these little courses and talks they're doing.
Let's just also acknowledge how her son was second place in our youth garden contest this year. Grew an amazing, both of their sons grew gardens this year.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, that was another really cool thing you put on. Anyway, so I have these little booklets here, and I'm gonna go through it. So normally in a sourdough course, I do offer these courses. I come to your house, and you can have your friends there, and we do a whole session, and we actually go through all the steps. Here, I don't have quite everything I need to do that. I mean, an hour is too short anyway, but I will take you through the steps, and you will see the different stages of the bread. And these little booklets, I made them this time so that you can at the end buy your starter with this booklet with a full recipe. At least you can find a recipe online. Everything is online these days. But this is just how I learn best. I went to someone as well, and we did it in person, and we did it in all the different stages. And in the end, you have what you learned from that person, right? So I've adapted what I learned and how it went, and so that's in here with all the facts about sourdough. And if you'd like that, you can purchase that at the end. So this front page, this is my grandma, and it's in in Switzerland, where I'm from. There in that little village, they had their own little community oven, and it's this. You can't really see it on here. She's in the oven on this picture, but so it's a little cabin, and there's shelves in the front. And in the back of the little cabin, tiny, right? Just a little cabin. And in the back is the stone oven. And then they would make the fire in there, and it was exactly this much wood, and it was this whole thing. Only the old ladies knew. And they would make that fire in there, and then the fire, once it was enough, that they didn't even check the temperature really, they just knew this many hours it would have to burn, and then they take it all out and clean it out, and then the breads would go in there and bake. And so I grew up, bread, and that was just normal. Oh, my mom's baking bread with my grandma, and it was just this thing, and it happened, and we had 50 breads in the freezer, and that was that, right? And then here, bread was such a rare thing. Toast is not bread to me. So then I started, I always baked bread, but it at one point my son had to do hi, come on in. At some point my son had to do this candida diet where you have to leave out yeast and sugar and all this stuff. So it really was a bit of a smack in the face to me of how much crap there is in our food that we buy. And I actually walked out of that appointment and had to go back home without going to get groceries. I was so frustrated. Every package had, every cracker had yeast in it. It was just insane. It's like, I need to go home and figure out what we're gonna eat the next month. So from then on, I kind of just, and I really had to tell myself not to go crazy, because you can go crazy, because then you can't eat anything anymore, right? So I kind of, especially since we live this way, what we do and what we make ourselves is great. And when I go to the store, then I'm like, I don't care, I can't. But so you just start, you know, doing little things, and bread was for sure one of the first things, because I always did that. But once I learned the sourdough technique, then it opened up a whole other, because there's no yeast in it, right? So that was really, really great. Anyway, so what was I gonna say? I have to check my booklet. By the way, if you have any questions, just ask throughout. I'm not gonna, I think that's the better way. Yeah, so exactly, that was just my personal history, but bread has been a thing like ever since, I know, probably cave times. It was always, bread was something they could make, they could take on their ships. Like, it was something that kind of stayed. And then it only became a bad thing, I think, once the commercial yeast, we had to make it faster, right? So with the commercial yeast, you can make a bread within an hour, and with sourdough, you can't. But in that process, there's so many good things happening to the flour that that's why it is a healthier bread. If we just put some like chemical, especially in the store-bought, like my son just did a, hi, come on in, no problem. Just come here, there's chairs. It's all good. It's not so serious. It's just sourdough. It's just, where was I?
Bad flour.
Bad
chemicals. Yuck.
Exactly. So through this process and the fermentation, which you probably heard from other things. I know I was at Melanie's course here about fermenting sauerkraut.
Yeah.
So in those, there's so many things that happen to these foods. Like in sourdough, the process of fermentation, it breaks down the gluten in the flour, and then it becomes more digestible to us. So a lot of people that actually have a gluten intolerance are fine with sourdough. And even like some people I know that grew their own wheat and had sourdough and were celiac are totally fine. So there's like two things. Of course, there's the flour, you know, with the chemicals that you have there, and then that's one thing. So you can, of course, do organic. I don't use organic flour because I do for us sometimes, but because I sell it, the price is just so insanely high that I can't really resell it to a decent price. So I just use the normal, with again that thing that I just say, I'm doing what I can, I'm making the best out of this product in this fermentation process, so it's already way much better whether it's organic or not. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. No problem. Okay, has anyone made sourdough before? Okay, and you're all going? Or you
It's there, I still do, I just thought you guys learn more.
Perfect, sweet. Yeah, there's always something, right? Okay, so I think we'll start with the actual process, unless you have any questions to sourdough ahead of this. Did you wanna, you're good? Okay, and just a quick breakdown here in cost, because this is also what Shuswap Food Action is kind of about, right? Like when I'm really oblivious to grocery store prices sometimes, and my husband's always like, why are you selling your eggs for $5? Like, because they don't have an egg business. So I'm just like, sure, just here's some eggs. So I keep giving, and when I go to the store sometimes I'm like, oh, like they're really all $7? Like, is the cheapest you can get in eggs? And same with the bread, right? Like this there's time that goes into sourdough, and so it does have a value, right? But you can make it yourself, and then it's just the time, and it's way cheaper than any toast that is horribly unhealthy for you. So I just kind of very simply broke it down. So I get the Rogers flour at Costco, which is like 21 bucks, I think. So broken down per loaf, that's 50 cents that you pay in flour. And then salt, this is really rough. I'm not like, but I'm like, okay, it's 10 cents. I do get like the good salt. Where's my little, oh here. I just took the exact amount of what we're gonna make after. This is just pink Himalayan salt. And then some electricity. And then you might have to buy one of these if you don't have one already. That's a Dutch oven, because it does do way better baking in here. It is possible without it. I've made it, but it just doesn't, the crust doesn't turn out as perfect. So that's maybe 50 bucks. You can find one of these, cheaper if they're on sale. Yeah, so we're like maybe at 150 for a bread made by yourself that is amazing and healthy and
I actually have a question about that then, about the crust. And like, crust is sometimes really hard.
Yeah.
If you don't use a Dutch oven, will you actually have softer crust?
Sometimes it makes it like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a really, really hard, weird, not crunchy, it's like almost like plasticky hard.
Okay.
Yeah. It does, I use, because when I bake for other people, I do 8 fit in my oven, but then I have to, so I have 4 of these, and then I have 4 of those cake form things, and they all fit, and then I just throw it in there, and it works fine.
Without a lid?
Without a lid.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, because if you would put it in that in the lid, it wouldn't have space.
Yeah.
So you always have to, even this one is actually my smaller one, and it's almost a little too small. So my bread's this size, if you see, oh, this was in another one. See, it's like, comes out like this. So sometimes with this one, when I have the lid on and it's going into the first stage in the oven, it can't go anywhere, and then it becomes like really weird and doesn't get this nice crack because it has to have space to go somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, while we're on the Dutch oven, the reason why the Dutch oven is because you're creating heat within this, and then when you quickly put it in and close it, it's like a steam thing happening. So sometimes what I do when I don't put them in, then I just open the oven and spray with a water bottle and shut it again, and then it has that steam going on in there. But it works really nice in there. Okay, so we will roll it up from the back. I've got different stages here. So this, it was transported, and it's really cold, and it's not very happy. It's really hard with when temperatures go like this, what they're doing right now, because actually my breads turn out better in winter because it's almost more consistent in the house, right? I kind of heat it and then it maybe drops a little at night. But in summer, when it gets really warm, I've almost killed my starter because of that, because it was just too warm. So this is the last stage, and this is like called the final rise. So this I put in about 2 hours ago into this basket, and then it just rises again for like 2 hours. And this stage now, I would take it and I would take it out of here, and I'll put it here, and then I just kind of tuck it in like that. You guys can always come forward if you need to see. And then I just use a razor blade or a knife, or not a knife, like something like really sharp. The razor blade is my favorite, and there's some you can get with a little holder. I just lost mine. I don't know where it is. And then you would take, let me bring that. So the last bit of it, it's already covered in brown rice flour, and that's what I would now sprinkle over again a little bit, just to get that, so it gets this white stuff on it, right? And then where you're scoring, so this part would be now your score, is you're doing your design. I won't do it now because I can't put it in the oven. But you just kind of, the last bit you're not gonna disturb it much anymore. You're just gonna kind of tuck it together, make a little circle, and then you do your cuts. And this one, so that it opens like this, that's the bigger, deeper cut. So somewhere you're gonna do a nice deep cut, and the other side where you want the pattern to be seen, it's really fine, right? So it's just like little, like that, right? And then somewhere on this side I will go deep and really cut into it. Okay, I'll put that.
How deep is deep? Quarter inch, half inch, centimeter?
Where did I put my razor
It's on
blade?
the bread.
It's on the thread. Good washing. Okay, so then I would just go like, really go into it like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this will be an interesting experiment. What happens with it now? Always something new. Okay, so that's the end. And then this one, oh yeah, so then when it goes, it's important that this is obviously in the oven and getting really hot. So you heat your oven at 500 degrees or whatever highest your oven goes. And you leave that in it while it's heating up. And then technically they say like 20 minutes or so even after, but whatever, when it's ready, it's ready. It's hot in there. I can't. Really be careful with these Dutch ovens. They can get really bad burns. I've got some scars along my arms. So because you'll have to take it out, and then that's the thing with, I used to do it with baking, what's it called? Parchment paper. So you would have a circle of parchment paper, and then I would drop this guy like upside down onto that parchment paper, and then do that scoring, and then I could just lift it in without like having to. And now I'm like, because I do 8 per day, I'm like, no, I'm not doing parchment paper for 8 breads in circles. So then I just score it and take a little one of these, you know, or this, and just kind of, because you don't want to too much touch it all the time, it'll kind of collapse. So I'll just kind of take it out and drop it right in there. And then I close it, and then it will go in the oven, and then it's 20 minutes at 500. And then you open the oven, take the lid off, and then another 15 minutes at 450. Is that what you do?
Close.
Close. Yeah. Perfect. And then...
So just for the time, is it gonna be, you're gonna have different times for different sizes of bread, right? Like, how do you know when it's done? If it's like a smaller loaf versus a bigger loaf? Or?
Yeah, so when I just do one,
Yeah.
like this size is with 500 grams of flour.
Okay.
That's that time. Unless, like, it always depends on your oven, right? I've baked it at a friend's house that can't get her oven that high, so then it was actually much longer. But she had a really old oven. I was like, oh, this bread doesn't look like it's supposed to. So I kept it in longer. But then with those, it would just be more important to really heat up the oven longer and make sure it's got that high temperature, right? Because every time you're opening the door, you're gonna lose that heat.
Yeah.
So then you just, but it is approximately that time always. Even if you bake a slightly bigger one, then you might just let you'll see when it's in there and it's turning this color, right? And at the bottom, it's kind of dark, then you know it's good. But if I do 8 at once, then sometimes I do extend that the 450, I might do, instead of just 15 minutes, I might do 20 or 25.
Can you just repeat the time and the temperature again?
Yeah, so it's 500 at the beginning, at 20 minutes,
Okay.
and then 450.
With the lid on.
Yeah, with the lid on, and then 450 for 15 minutes.
With the lid off?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you take it out of the Dutch oven completely?
Yeah, don't let it cool off in the Dutch oven,
Okay.
because then the moisture and then it will get kind of soggy. So I take it out right away. Again, be careful, it's hot, and I just kind of chuck it out. And
Are you oiling the Dutch oven?
sorry?
Are you oiling it?
No, I leave it it doesn't ever stick as long as it's heated before.
Right.
Right, if you put it in cold, then I think that's when it sticks, yeah.
When you drop the temperature down to 450,
Yeah.
are you taking it out, taking the lid off, dropping down to 450 and putting it right back in, or are you waiting for it to actually get to 450?
No, good question. Yeah, no, I put it right back in.
Okay.
Because it drops so quickly with opening that door.
Yeah.
You're probably not even at 450 anymore.
Okay.
Like when I usually put it, then I see it's going back up to 450.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some other question? No?
Is that all in this book?
Yeah, everything's in this booklet. Yeah, that I'm blabbing about, maybe in slightly different order, but I'm just showing you the different stages so you understand, because I find that's the, you know, honestly, you can find a recipe somewhere, I'm sure, but I find seeing it and then remembering that what you saw will help you in the recipe. So that's how I do my full courses as well. We just actually, everyone then does it, makes a dough, and you get the feel of how it'll feel, how it'll look, and so on, right? So this stage is now, so I'm gonna make the dough after to show you, but this one is how it comes out of fermentation. So the first phase is called fermentation, and that's the longest. So you make your dough, and then it goes, like, I always do this overnight. So with sourdough, the most important thing is kind of finding your timeline, right? The ones that it's not actually hard to make. The thing is finding your schedule, that it fits your schedule, that you don't like, oh, I left the dough out there for 2 days, right? To make.
It worked out good.
Yeah, it just gets more sour. It's totally fine. In Switzerland, actually, in bakeries you'll find they have like sourdough fermented 20 hours, sourdough fermented 6 hours. Just, you know, like, because that's what makes it more sour. So that,
sour.
yeah, that really tangy kind of soury taste that comes from staying longer in fermentation or at a different temperature. So I find my breads turn a little like at the beginning you can't really tell, right? It's sourdough bread and it's good. It's always good. But then you kind of like, oh, well, it's a bit more, you know, a little more sour or whatever. The kids will always tell me. My kids are the worst. My kids, if it's like a special day, they want toast, believe it or not. I could like shake them. No, but they, Mom, this is different. Why does this not have? I'm like, oh my goodness, you're so picky. So yeah, this has been, this wasn't that long ago. Let me just think. This morning, yes, it was 5 a.m. this morning. I started the dough, and then when I got home at about 11, I did the fold, right? So every time, and I'll show you this with this one, every time it's, just during your fermentation, you can come back to your dough and do the stretch and fold. So you would just go in here and you'd pull it and fold it in. And then you do that, like not much, you're not wanting to lose all the nice air in there, but you can kind of, don't be too scared about it too. It's like I say, it's just sourdough bread. There, and then you tuck it in like that again, right? And then you would leave it again. But this is kind of coming towards the end of its stage, so this is now where I would take it out, and then do another one of these folds, and then it would be tucked into this basket for their final rise.
Are you putting any oil on it? Like, no oil, okay.
No, and don't work with more flour either. Like, it just works with its, like, you know, in a normal bread, you gotta keep putting some flour on the thing and you tuck it in. You kind of don't want to change that.
How often do you go between each tuck and fold?
Sorry?
Between each tuck and fold that you do?
Yeah.
Do you do 2, and how many, like, how much time is in between?
It doesn't really matter what you do. Like, I leave mine overnight. So usually I'll show you, I'll explain my timeline. So my timeline is usually sometime in the evening after supper or before supper, let's say between 6 and 8, I start my dough. Then it goes into this bowl. And then before I go to sleep, maybe 2 times before I go to sleep, I come and do these folds. And then I leave it, I cover it with a wet cloth, and then I go to bed, and it stands there till whenever I get up. I used to be very on, it doesn't matter, it makes no difference. Especially now in winter because it's cooler, right? You're not so quickly gonna get a sour bread because the temperature at night, in my house at least, isn't 25 degrees. So it won't, so that's another thing. If you wanna slow down fermentation, because let's say you just can't get it to bake, you just put it in the fridge or put it downstairs in your basement. Then it slows it down. But you can do, if you're doing that whole process during the day, you can come back and do 6 of these folds. It's not gonna make a huge difference. What it creates is more air in the dough, and that like kind of elasticy kind of feel to the sourdough bread almost happens from that. So I don't like not doing it at all. You know, you kind of do need to do them, but so then, and if you haven't, and then in the morning I come and like take it out, then you do this last fold. Can you all see it? Okay. So then you just kind of, I sometimes even like stretch it apart a little, kind of test it. So see, it's kind of really, it's holding together. That's kind of what the dough needs to look like. It doesn't just break apart. And then you just kind of fold it back in, like this. Not totally food safe here, but and then you're tucking it back in. I think I'll give this one to my chickens. And then you're tucking it back in. And then I would go and put it in my basket. Right? And then you don't touch it anymore for your final rise. I'm gonna put this just in here now.
So like it's a day,
Sorry?
a day,
What's a day?
like you do it the day before? and-
Yeah, it takes like almost 24 hours, right? But you can, like my starter is really, really active. So I've noticed that sometimes I can even really shorten the whole thing, right? Because if the starter is like this bubbly, it like, as soon as I feed this guy now, because it's so bubbly, it'll kind of overflow. And then you know, like that fermentation could easily be done in like probably 4 or 5 hours, and then you do another bit of a rise, and then you bake it. Yep.
So I've cooked it in the past, and like you said, sometimes the starter can be quite active.
Yeah.
But then
The
in the
bread
next,
mold?
and then the next couple that I do, then it's not active.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
why does that happen?
That's a good point. We'll talk about the starter then.
Okay, sorry.
The starter is actually the most important thing anyway. So, by the way, what's the time?
I'm not sure.
2:30.
Good. Okay, so the starter is, there's always gonna be more questions about the starter. I've baked for like 6-7 years with sourdough, and I was like, why is this now, right?
Yeah.
So, but first of all, my phone number's on there. Call me anytime. Because I love when these things happen, because I just learn as well. Because everyone does different things, right? Everyone has different, whatever's going on at home and whatever, how you're baking and what you do to it. And not this summer, the last summer, I thought I had killed my starter because I had left it on the counter. And then I did this whole like, oh my goodness, my whole kitchen counter was with like, I had separated it and experimented with the starter. What the heck, how can I get this going again? Because everywhere I read, it always said you can't kill your starter. And it's actually true, because so this is still the same starter that I got when I learned, and she had it for like, it's a really old starter. She got it from someone, I don't know, like 100 years old. Which is kind of cool. And that's actually how my grandma used to bake too. So they did it different. They did it with, they would keep a little bit from their bread before, and then she would freeze that. It was like their starter, but they always used, I think, a little bit of yeast. But then when she had that little piece, then that's how she would make her next bread, yeah, and keep growing. Yeah.
I've read that if you, like say you're going away on holidays or something like
Yeah.
that, and you, yeah, in the fridge, but if you add, like a ton of flour with no water, and then put it in the fridge, I don't know if that's something, I'm gonna say you haven't done that. based
I
on your
haven't done
answer.
that. But I have left it in the fridge for a long time and it doesn't die, I
Okay.
promise. The only thing when I have told
Mine
someone.
went pink, and I.
Pink?
Yeah,
Okay, that's new.
yeah, which
so,
I read was not.
and it was in the fridge?
Yeah,
Okay.
I forgot it, the kids pushed it like to the back.
Yeah, yeah. I've had it so when you look at this starter, like you actually only need a tiny bit to start. Like, and this is, I just put this in here an hour ago and it's already growing again, and I haven't even fed it. So this is like super active right now. And to your question, if you have this starter active and you leave it too long not feeding, then it goes kind of lame, right? So it has to be fed before you start baking.
Okay.
You can't just take it and think, okay, this is gonna stay, like this might stay like this. If you guys don't go and bake now right away, then put it in the fridge and then you'll do the process I explained now with feeding.
Yeah, and that's what I was told, if you're not gonna use it,
Yeah,
then put it in the fridge.
yeah,
So it remained in the fridge for over a month
yeah,
until I got to it.
And then?
When I got to it,
yeah,
I took it out,
Yeah.
I started feeding it,
yeah,
and then, like I said, it looked like it was promising. It was
Yeah.
it was bubbling, active.
yeah.
But then when I went to go again and add more, then it didn't anymore. When I added more flour to it.
Did you take away from it? Or did you just keep feeding?
I think I just kept feeding.
Okay, that's a mistake. So,
Took its last breath.
Oh, because I
you
did.
have to take it away.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, when I started,
Yes.
I was like, I kept, so when you take a course with me, what happens, we make the dough,
Yeah,
and then you go home with this stage, whatever it was when I brought it, right? And kind of, you just got it together, and I'll show you that right now. And then you go home and you let it ferment, and then you bake, and that's how I was like, this is perfect, because then I have to go and do it, right?
Right.
And then I got starter. So then I went home and did it right away. So I never experienced what the heck everyone's problem was because I just kept doing it until one summer last year, I let that stand and I was like, I'm feeding this and it's not what's happening, right? And I like, oh my God, I threw away so many doughs because they kept not rising. And the reason is, and I then during that time while I was always baking kind of back to back, I was always reading about all these discard recipes. Oh, use your discard recipe. I'm like, what the heck is your discard? I'm like, I never have anything I throw away from this starter. Why is everyone making recipes with stuff that you throw away? And then I was like, and through this process, because my starter was dead, or I thought it was dead, I was like, oh, I have to like go way back and start all over. So what you do then, you take a tiny bit, like 25 grams, and you put it in a small jar, like so, right? And then you feed it, you're feeding your starter always 1-to-1 ratio. So 25 grams of starter would give, you'd feed it with 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water, right? So you start with that little amount. And that little amount, because it's maybe been a month in the fridge, or like for me, it was too long on the counter and was just kind of done. The first feed does nothing. And you're just like, oh my God. Then you take that away again. You take away again till you have 25. And you do it again. And you have to do that sometimes up to like 5 days, right? And if it starts just at the beginning, you might just see a little, you know, like these are big. Do you want to pass this around in this starter?
So, but I was watching a documentary and this lady on, and she said that you can go up to almost 2 weeks when it's the very first start, if you ever done it.
Like 2 weeks
From
of
dry. This is probably wet. Is this wet?
Yeah, this is not
Oh.
dried starter.
Oh.
Yeah. So dried starter, I was actually handing those out last year, but I just feel like it's too big of a deal to start from a dried starter. Like a dried starter, you really have to baby it. Like you're putting in that dried powder and then adding like 20 grams of water, and then 20 grams of flour, and then you take it away again, and you do again, and again, and again. And for people starting out, it's just too much. It's like, why is this not, you know, and I have not heard anyone of like getting my starter going from the dehydrated one. So that's why this time I thought, you know what, I'll bring the actual active starter, and then you can start right away. Like you could take this one now and just, and take it right out and start. But so this is now about, usually you start like with 50, but I'm really bad with recipes. I do not work with recipes. I just like whatever it's in. Although with the feeding, I do really measure. I do measure making my sourdough bread. I don't just go by feel. But in here is about 50 to 100 grams of starter. So you'd go home and you'd feed this now 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. No, yes. And then for your recipe, you have 100 grams of starter that you need, right?
Is
And
it
then you're left with a
important
little
to
bit.
do grams or like, you know, a half cup, for instance, like, because that's
No.
100, that's, yeah.
Yes, I go with grams.
So
because-
weight
and
is
that's
important.
another thing, so that might be something you have to get, because it doesn't really work with cups. It has to be more accurate.
Okay.
I find, do you find like if you put your water in first that you get a better mix than if you
Yeah.
were to put your flour in first?
You always put water first.
Yeah, yeah.
Water first, and then the starter into the water, and we'll do that right now. Okay, so that's my scale. So I've measured this at home, just so okay, so then put my water.
Does it have to be room temperature?
Yeah, I try and have it, like I usually take it out of the tap and have like warm, slightly warm, especially now when it's colder in the house.
How much water?
350.
350, okay.
So does it matter what water you use? I've heard that.
Yes,
Okay.
it does. I don't really know because I'm on a well, so I haven't had problems, but I have heard from students that they've had problems when they use like the normal like city.
If you just sit it on the counter for like 24 hours, the chlorine will evaporate and that's better, yeah.
What, like reverse osmosis is okay?
Sorry?
Like running it through your RO is okay?
Yeah, that's probably fine, yeah.
You
I
just
mean,
don't
I
want the
haven't-
chlorine to kill any of the
Yeah.
good
The probiotics.
yeast and,
Yeah, I've only heard one person actually say that it totally didn't work, but I'm sure it would be better using water that's not chlorinated. Okay, then, where did my starter go? Here it is. So then I take 100 grams of starter.
So sorry, you had 350 grams of water?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a gooey mess. And then 100 grams of starter. And then I just kind of mix that. And this sourdough is really a hand thing and not a KitchenAid task. It kind of once you're like, you know, I'm not saying go in there with your hands after you've been in your chicken coop, but but it wants our bacteria. It's alive, right? I actually watched this documentary from a whole bunch of European bakers, and there was this one really old bakery in Germany that had been going for like, I don't know, centuries or something. And the baker there, he did everything sourdough. So every product in his bakery was made with sourdough, and he didn't even actually have a starter. There was so much bacteria in this bakery that he just left the dough at the beginning there, and it would just start building up in there, because he explained that it's in the air, right? It's like good bacteria. It's not bad bacteria. So sometimes we have to come back. We're a bit too clean sometimes, right? So that's that, and then we add
So if you dissolve the starter?
Yeah,
in
it
water,
just kind of
it's totally
like a
dissolved?
milky, not totally, it still has like some lumps,
Okay.
right? And the way you can tell that it's active is that when you put the starter in here, it's actually floating, right? If it just kind of blobs right to the bottom, then your starter probably isn't really active. Sometimes it can have like bubbles a little bit, and you're still like, that doesn't really look right. It's just one way to look.
Yeah, because you want the carbon dioxide, you want the bubbles.
Yeah, you want the bubbles, and then obviously if it has
Yeah.
enough bubbles, it really is kind of like floating on top. Okay, so I'm just gonna check that this is 500, but I did measure at home. It's 500 grams of flour. Perfect. So precise today. And so like everyone always asks, how can you tell me how you make your salad dressing? Can you tell me? I'm like, I don't know. I just throw everything in there. Okay, and then we just bring that together. So no salt yet. Because that's the first stage. And again, I'm not going to go into too much details. It is in that booklet. Combining the flour first just lets the gluten kind of take in that first, just kind of starts building that without the salt. Doesn't have to be a long time, but just do that without.
Do you ever put honey or sugar in?
No.
That? Okay.
Unless if I like make cinnamon buns, then it's a sweet starter kind of that you make.
Are you doing that in the first round, or do you do it in the next, when you're adding in your cinnamon and?
Oh, not the, I wouldn't add cinnamon, but for the cinnamon dough,
Yeah.
you would add sugar now.
No, okay.
Yeah, you kind of make it a little.
When you're making your initial dough.
Yeah.
Okay. So any flavorings or anything else that you want to make into something, you aren't doing it in this first process?
No, so if
Oh.
you add
Not
like,
the salt, pardon me.
yeah, there's not even salt in
Okay.
here yet. So after, like if you were to add seeds or nuts or something, or rosemary, yeah, whatever you want, I wouldn't do it in the fermentation.
Right, okay, that makes sense, yeah, okay.
Do you use the same amount of grams of flour if you're using rye or spelt or whole wheat or?
So yeah, this now is all white, right? So
Yeah.
that's the easiest one to just kind of start. If you want to add something else, I would never do just the rye or just I always do like at least half white and then maybe spelt or something else. And then you do notice it's a little different, but it's maybe a little more flour, but unless it really feels completely wet or something, I wouldn't. Never be worried about, like, just because it's like sticky like this, that's not to add flour. It's not like when you're making a normal bread and it's supposed to turn into this nice smooth dough already. It's supposed to be this like sticky, and you don't even have to spend too much time on this. This is fine. It's just the flour is connecting to the water. That's all that it is. And then it can start working, and then it'll just start getting smoother as we do these stretch and folds, right? But now I'll just let it sit for a bit, and then we can add the salt. So that just stays. Sometimes I forget and walk away, and then it can just now, because everything's so dry, the dough tends to dry out as well, right? So I always put a wet towel over it, so at least it doesn't go that quick, so I can get this. Otherwise you get like a crust on top, and then it's kind of weird after in the dough.
Do you ever use your starter to make just kind of more of a traditional loaf of sourdough bread that you would see like in the store that's maybe doesn't have the crust?
What do you mean? Like a not, like just
Like,
bread.
you know, when you were saying your children were asking for toast, I'm
Yeah.
assuming they were wanting kind of like a
Just
like a more commercialized loaf of bread
Yeah,
type
yeah.
situation. Do you ever use your starter for that and making kind of without the hard crust? Because that's what I find is my kids won't
Yeah.
eat it with
Eat
the
the
hard
crust,
crust.
yeah. I mean, I make bagels, I make buns out of it. You can make whatever you want to make with it.
Okay, it's just a different cooking method. I guess.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. there's all kinds of things you can add, and some things are just like you add the sourdough starter to it, and it doesn't even really, just kind of for using that discard, right?
Right,
You
yeah,
can
like
just add
pancakes
to-
or
yeah,
crackers.
Exactly. But it will never, like, it's still like that homemade kind of, you're not gonna get that softy bread, right? Unless, yeah, there are recipes you can, you know, like with butter and make kind of whatever, you can make a kind of brioche sourdough, right? There's all kinds of things you can just skip. It's a little, it takes a little more experience, let's say, right, to just try those things out, because it does remove that step of just throwing yeast in and then just it happens. You do have to take a bit more care of it and go through this kind of process to make that work, but you can make all kinds of things. Someone was asking something, or question, okay. Yeah, so again, exactly, the discard, right? So now I've lowered this down, right? So now it's back to that, whatever, maybe 100 gram, maybe 50 grams. And I don't go and like take this out of this jar anymore to make like sure, oh, is this now 50 grams? That's why I'm saying I'm like not that exact on the number, but I can tell that this is kind of what I have in these packages, right? So then you can boost your starter sometimes by giving it a bit more with, that's what you were saying with the flour maybe. So instead of just a 1-to-1 ratio, you give it like 4, like you double the, you go like 4 to 1, right? So let's say this is 50 grams, you put 150 flour and 150 water. Those two always have to be the same. The water and the flour that you put in have to be the same, but you can add the amount once in a while to give it like a kick. But if you're starting and it's like looking really, like been in the fridge 2 weeks, then you really have to start with lower, like less. Don't take a whole amount and throw in like 400 grams of flour and think it's just gonna become active. You go lower down to 25 grams and just start in a little jar.
Should it stay out of the fridge for a while before you?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the one that's in my fridge, can I like pull it out, take out 25 grams, put the lid back on, throw the guy back in the fridge, and just feed that one and leave my other guy dormant?
Yeah.
I don't have to feed it before I stick it back in the fridge?
It's always good. I mean, the problem is you kind of don't want to just feed it and then you're wasting all this, right? You keep getting all this discard. That's what it is, right? So, but because you might, it happens anyway, and that's why all these discard recipes do show up, right? Other than if I kind of continuously bake, then obviously I'm always using lots of starter. But if you don't, then, and it's just been in the fridge too long, I would do that. You can still keep that, but eventually it is probably going to go, if you never feed that guy,
he's going to get real sad.
Yeah, exactly. But at least you're lowering it. Like when I was preparing for this week, I got a huge jar, like one of those, what is it? Like just a gallon, yeah. And started putting, because it was like, I don't want to bring you kind of lame starter. I want to have it really active, right? So then I can't just leave it standing there and it'll just stay active till Sunday. So I kept taking a little bit out, and again, I had like 10 jars going because I kept so I kept baking for people this week just to keep that starter going. But that's in the end kind of the only way you do it. I've heard of people like freeze their discard and use it later in whatever recipe, because a discard really doesn't have to be an active. If you're using it just in a recipe for pancake dough, it doesn't have to be an active starter, right? But if you decide one day I'm just going to make a big baking day and use all my starter, then you might make cinnamon buns and you might make all these things, and then you're back to your 50 grams that goes in the fridge, right? But yes, good question. When you take it, when you know you want to do a bread and your starter has been in the fridge for 2 weeks, take it out the day before you want to bake and feed it and just let it go, let it sit there. If you think you're gonna make a bread today and your starter's been in the fridge, you're not gonna get that starter active, right? You have to give it, first of all, it has to have room temperature and it has to be fed. And then maybe if it's been too long, you might have to do that whole thing, take it away and feed it again to get it really active, right?
What would it look like if you had a failure in your starter? So if you didn't have an active enough starter and you went through the bread making process?
Yeah, then you see it kind of after the fermentation, it will be still the same size.
Okay.
Right?
Or you put it in the oven and it is
And it's
absolutely like this big and it's rock solid.
To bring the
Like-
corner of the table off.
Oh, yeah. That was definitely not.
That's where, like, if you test it before,
Yeah.
if you drop it in some water before,
Yeah.
and if it floats, like she was
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
So
that's
when
a
you
good
start
way to, like,
already,
go
that's
for it.
that's kind of the one test. And what I always do, that's why I have these rubber bands around here, right? So this one, I just wanted to show you. This one I just fed. So this was the amount that I'm giving you in here, and I put it in here and put a rubber and fed it, and it's already this much higher.
I love that idea for the rubber.
The rubber band is helpful because then you can tell,
See how much it's
and
grown.
it should actually be double by the time you want to bake, right? So a little bit like this, I just know now this guy has been like, he, poor thing, had to travel with me in minus 15, so I'm giving him a little, you know, time to rise yet, but if I were at home now where the wood stove is going, it would be double.
Yeah.
Right, so, you
And I
can kind
noticed
of,
you've got a coffee filter on it. Is
Yes.
that what you put in the fridge?
yeah,
Not a solid
not
lid?
closed, no.
Not a-
And that's why maybe it could turn
Maybe
pink
that's-
depending what you had in your fridge,
Yeah,
right? It
this
sucks
particular
it
one,
in there,
I
right?
think
So
so,
again, it's like, it's fine, it needs the bacteria, but make sure your fridge isn't going gross either, right? Because we're that stuff is, yeah, it takes it all in. It's like, you know, these things are all alive. And it's like kombucha. If it's something that is fine to live, and it's a bacteria that it's sour and yeah, it stinks, but it's good, right? But then there's a point where it's like, okay, that's enough bad stuff in there, right? And then that's where your kombucha SCOBY would go moldy, or at the starter, like I've had people, why is mine like actually black? Is it still alive? I'm like, yeah, maybe throw that one away. Like you can have some more of mine. So there's a point for sure, right, where you didn't, but if it still looks fine, even if it has a little liquid layer on top, sometimes if you leave it long in the fridge, that's fine. Just mix it in again and feed it, and it'll be fine.
It's called hooch.
What's that called?
It's called hooch.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're feeding it, do you just pour water and flour in and not mix it? You just let it sit on top, or do you mix it?
Oh yeah, I mix it.
Yeah.
So so they say not to use metal, like with anything, I think fermentation, I don't know if it's really, but it's just because it's like
metal
a
all the time.
reactive.
Yeah.
I thought maybe like you broke the jar that you were stirring it with the metal spoon.
Maybe, I don't know, yeah, that would
Then there
be,
goes your stir.
yeah. And I used to always, like, that's why I like getting, jars that are a little wider, you know, that you could kind of, once in a while, this stuff up here gets really disgusting, right? Because you're not gonna scrape, like it's hard and crusty and you're like just working in there. So once in a while I do move my jars and get them. So I just take this, what's left, and start in a new jar, right? But that too is like, it's fine. I used to just go in there with my hand and mix the starter every time I fed it. Now I use like a wooden spoon, and then I actually kind of, not like forever, but a little bit. You want it like you're like hitting air into that. I didn't bring any
So you're
extra
supposed to stir before you add anything.
Nope. Now I would be ready to feed this one again, right? So I would put my 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water in there, and then I just go like this, like I'm doing it now. Right? I'll just kind of scrape the sides all down. Like that, all that starter is back in it, and then I kind of, obviously now I don't have much in there, but if I would, then I just make sure that all the flour is now connected back with the water, and it's an actual like dough. You don't want like the flour separate from your dough.
But on your point, I did break a jar with
Oh.
too aggressive of
Yeah,
And then you're
a
stirring.
metal
What are you gonna do?
spoon, yeah.
yeah, that would be bad. That's how you lose a starter as well.
Exactly.
You don't want glass in your starter. Yeah, so that's, and again, right, it doesn't need to be that energetic.
Yes. I was
But-
just excited for my time.
Exactly, yeah, we're getting excited
We
about
all
it.
learned.
But it is kind of, so, does anyone know spätzle?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a dish from Germany, I think, actually, but we do it in Switzerland lots, and it's actually flour, water, and
Egg.
eggs. Exactly.
With the noodle?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it makes
okay.
kind of, and
Yeah.
that dough as well, you would take it in here and you actually hit it like with a wooden spoon until bubbles, it'll kind of create, like it kind of smashes bubbles to the side. And sometimes you see that in here too, but you don't have to like get it that going. You just want to kind of that way you get the air into it again, right? So it's like just mixing it together. I'm getting really messy here now. Okay, any questions?
So for a person who just wants to maybe bake once a week,
Yeah.
for instance,
Yeah.
so you've got the starters on your counter,
Yeah.
and it's active only if you continue feeding it. But because you're not only going to bake once a week, you're going to have to remove some out, right?
Yeah, so first of all, if you're not using it, I would put it in the fridge.
Okay. Even just after, if you're not going to bake even for like a day or 2 days, you put it in the fridge?
No, if you know you're baking in 2 days, leave it out
Okay.
right now. In summer, be careful depending on how
Right.
hot your house is. But right now, I leave my starter out mostly because I bake like every second day.
But if you're going to bake every Sunday, for instance.
Yeah, then you do your thing on Sunday, and then you would put it in the fridge, and then maybe
Okay.
take it out Thursday, and
Okay.
start just making sure that it's fed, and just make sure that you don't overdo it. And it has a way harder time staying alive if it's big, right? If you had, that's why if I had this big jar now, and I keep trying to keep it active because I don't know how many people will want to take starter, but I want to have starter, and then if I'd leave that all in that jar now for 3 more days, it'll just right down, and then what do I do with that? And like most of that I'll have to throw away. So same just in one household, if you're feeding this and then I'm like, oh, I'll do it another day, then of course that all collapses again, and then it's not anymore 100 grams, it's actually then 200 grams, so you would actually have to feed that 200 grams flour and 200 grams water. But then
But it doesn't have
sometimes
to-
it's like, oh my god,
Yeah.
what do I do with this? Like it's kind of like a person, body. How many calories do we need? You no matter how heavy we are, every person has a certain amount of calories that they need. So you can't just go and tell a person, oh, yeah, and that's why those diets don't work, right? Because if I just tell a person, okay, you're taking 1,000 calories, but the person is this much weight, then it actually is not very productive because the body's going to be like screaming for more calories. So you have to just slow it down. And same with the starter. Like I can't just say, oh yeah, I'm just gonna feed this guy right away the amount that I make a dough. It'll be totally overwhelmed with the food it's getting, right? So you have to give it what it actually needs, and it needs ratio 1:1. If I'm 50 grams, he needs 50 grams of food, right? And then you take those, because 50 plus 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour equals 150, and you're taking 100 away for your recipe, then you're back to the 50. And you put that back in the fridge, and then you start again.
I find I make a lot of crackers because my recipe is like 1 cup of starter
Yeah.
discard, and that'll make like 1 tray of crackers, and my
Yeah.
kids will eat that literally that day if I let them.
Perfect. Yeah, if
But-
you have something to use it for, right? But it's like that what you're using for that, it doesn't have to be active.
No, but
Right.
like I can separate
You can
that, so
separate.
that's how I've personally found
Yeah.
to use it, but.
Yeah, but just so we understand, that's kind of where people get like wrong with their starter numbers. It's kind of important that way to understand the weight and how much it is and what it needs. But it is, and I have watched these super sourdough people that do like a boost, and they give it 4:1, and they would feed this 50 grams like 150 and 150 water, and it gets really active. Like just once in a while to switch it up and give it but if you just keep going with your one bread, then that's kind of the thing you go. And the timeline, again, right, like it depends on your life. If you have to go to work in the morning, then the overnight fermentation is probably not ideal, because then if you're not home till 5, then this bread is then sitting another whole 12 hours maybe in their final rise. And that's another important thing. If you do the final rise too long, it can collapse, right? So if you're not baking it after like 2 or 3 hours in the final rise, or it's too warm in your house, then just put that final rise in the fridge, right? Put this basket now in the fridge, because it'll just kind of, it actually, not, collapse is the wrong word, it actually rises really much, but as soon as you take it out of that basket, it goes off your, you know, so then it'll still work, like it'll just kind of quickly throw that whole, it won't look pretty, but it'll still work. But I find if you want to do a nice, because that's what most people don't know, is how do you always make those nice things? It has to be still kind of compact, right? It's if it's too fluffy and you're like starting to cut into it, it'll just go all over, right?
Okay.
So if I wouldn't have 8 breads at once, I would actually always put it in the fridge, because if it's in the fridge before, it goes way better with that razor.
Right.
When you take it out of the fridge, do you leave it for a bit to warm up before you bake
No.
it? Okay.
I do it right away and put it in there, yeah.
So
And
would
some
you-
people even, I've even done it and put it in the freezer for 5 minutes before.
Okay.
Just so it really gets, because when you watch those people do those really artsy kind of things on their dough, that's how they do it.
When are you adding the salt after the?
Now.
Okay, so.
Thank you for the reminder.
Okay.
Still on this, what a great class. Okay, so
So
then-
normally that will have sat for how long? Overnight?
No,
No.
this is just for like 15 minutes.
Okay.
But it can go longer, like sometimes I forget and go watch a movie or something, and then
Right.
you come back like, oh, the salt isn't in there yet. But if you leave it too long and it's just like this, then it'll start building a little crust. Then you just have to make sure that you have some water again to like soften those crusty bits, right? Because otherwise they won't really disappear. So I put about 10 to 15 grams of salt in here. And then
Can you put less salt?
yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever how you salt. And then you just mix that back in. And have some water. This is, I promise, going to my chickens because I like washing my hands
So
in
the
here.
salt's
But I
not-
do need some more.
The salt's not gonna affect the fermentation process, it's just more for taste, is that what you're putting?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you were making pizza dough, like I add basil and oregano to, and like seasoning to my dough, would
Yeah.
that be when you would do it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would add that too.
Rather
just now.
than-
I wouldn't like put in nuts or like big things right now.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you'd have to kind of play with it what you're putting in. But if you're just putting in like some
Yeah.
spices or something, herbs, then I would
Okay.
totally do that now.
Okay.
And then you just see now it's already like kind of more like a dough. And then again, like you're not kneading this bread ever. Like it's actually just doing its thing, and you kind of come back and you just tuck this into each other. So now this would be how I leave it, and I cover it with a wet towel, and then it would stay. And then I might and then I might come back and do a couple of those stretch folds. I don't know, 3-4 times, and then wait till the morning.
And so, sorry, backing it up, you had said that if you're not gonna use it, like you can do it exactly where you got it at that stage.
Yeah.
But if you're not ready to bake it, then you would put it back in the fridge?
Not now. So that would be the final rise, this basket stage.
Oh, okay.
So now we'll roll it back from the beginning.
Got
We
it.
start the dough, we put the flour, the water, starter, right? Then we have the salt.
Yeah.
And then we go into the longest process, which has to be at least 6 hours, is the fermentation, right? It can be up to 12 hours, that's when it gets more sour. So during those 6 hours is when you do the stretch and folds to get it a little more smooth, and it'll slowly start rising. So every time you come and it's a little bigger, then you're just a little more gentle. You're not going in there and like pushing all that air out. You're just kind of lifting it out and folding it back in like that. And then right now, the gluten hasn't worked its thing yet, right? So it's not really going anywhere. But with this time and fermentation is when the gluten gets stretchy, and then you can really pull it up and do those nice long folds. Like sometimes I even like take this whole thing out and kind of slap it back down like this. And then it looks a little weird right now, but it looks different every time you come back to it. I'm just showing you the different things.
So 6 to
Then-
12 hours.
6 to 12 hours this. Then I come in the morning and I take it out.
So that's overnight.
Yeah, so that's okay. So let's say I just wanted to say an example of someone that might not do it overnight. So let's say this is during the day, and you're just, or let's even say you have to go to work and the only time you can serve this is in the morning. So you just do it right away, you have your breakfast, get ready, do a couple of folds before you leave, then you go to work. It does its fermentation through the day, you come back at 5, and then you take it out. Fermentation's over, and then you take it out onto your thing like we did before with that stage, and you do that last fold, right? Like really stretch and fold that in, roll it, tuck it in, and then you put it in your basket. And then this is the final rise, right? Then it stays in here. This towel, I use this towel. I actually used, like for a long time, I just used the bowl and just put the towel and let it rise in there. The baskets are good because air comes to it from there too. And then you let that, don't touch it anymore, right? No more stretching during the final rise. And then after the 2, this is the stage now where you could put it in the fridge. So let's say you're home at 5 and you've done this, it goes in there, but then you go out and you're like, you'll be home really late. And you might not even bake it that night. Then you can take this whole basket and just put it in the fridge and bake in the morning. So then your bread is actually ready. Like, it could have been ready earlier, but I'm saying you can play with your timeline depending how it works for you with temperature, right? So get it cold when you want it to slow down.
And how long should that final rise be minimum?
Final rise only needs like 2 hours in room temperature. If you put it in the fridge, it still does its thing, but it'll just go slow and it'll kind of be stagnant. But then whenever you're ready, then you just take it out of the fridge and bake.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it can stay overnight in the fridge and bake in the morning and no
Yeah.
big deal?
No.
If I were to like get up super early, pull my starter out of the fridge, feed it, how long does it need to like hang out in its feeding zone? Like, could I continue the process that day? Or does
Yes.
it need a day to?
It depends how long, right? It depends how dormant your starter has gone. But if you knew you wanted to start in the morning, what you could do is feed it in the night, at nighttime, and just let it grow through the night.
Yeah.
Like if it's really active like mine now, right? Like this one that I brought, this is ready to go now.
Yeah.
Right, and I only did it like an hour or so. And if you keep doing that, like the more frequent that starter is just being fed, you'll bake within the next half hour.
Okay.
Right, like so. But as long as this is room temperature and still active, and you don't miss the point. So that's why again the rubber band is really good, because if it collapses, you'll see. As soon as it's like not, you see where it was, right?
Yeah.
And then when it starts going back down, you're like, oh, then it's better to remove some and feed it
Do it
again.
again.
Don't feed the same thing again, right? Because it's collapsed. So it's gonna have a really hard time eating that much food. So take it away and start with less. And that's where you can play. Don't like make it a big deal and go and measure exactly 25 grams. You'll see, right? Like if you just have a little bit in a jar, feed that 25 and 25 and see what happens. Right? And then you see right away whether it's gonna go. Just never feel like, if you like urgently need a bread, it probably won't work. That's my experience. then that's the thing where you have a few in the freezer, right? You take one out of the freezer. Okay, any questions?
Wait, just for the freezer, if you were to go through the whole process and then have you're at the final rise, could you just stick it in the freezer instead of the fridge and then pull it out and throw it in the oven?
No, if you wanted to like have that as a fresh bread option, you mean, and
Yeah.
it comes out of the freezer, I would bake it quick for the first phase. Like let's say put it in for like 20 minutes at least, that
Okay.
it's got that first bake, and
Yeah.
it's because otherwise it'll collapse in the
Okay.
fridge. It won't rise anymore, right?
Okay.
In the
You
freezer,
can
yeah.
but bake it that it's almost ready, and then you can take it out, let it thaw, and just put it in the really hot oven for another 15 minutes, and it'll be like fresh.
Have you done that before?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna try and do that more often, that I can offer people breads that I don't have to be doing right then, right? So, because I've done it like more often than I just even put this now in the fridge. Oh my goodness, we haven't had any bread. Probably staring at this bread, when are we ever gonna make it? So, do you wanna quickly look at it, just so you feel the crust and everything? Pass that around and then we'll cut it
Oh,
up.
that's so
Can you make your own starter?
Yes.
Without having someone else's starter, like?
You can, yes. You can actually, same again, it'll just take time,
Yeah.
and it just kind of needs collecting bacteria from the air.
Right.
And it's the same process. You're actually just starting with flour and water, waiting, removing, feeding, removing, feeding. It's this constant, right? But it's not going to be a big starter until it's active.
Yeah.
Do you know about how long, because I just recently had to restart my, Saturday.
Yeah.
Would you like to have a look?
It's only been a week or two. So how long would you recommend when someone's just starting a starter before they are, like, it's ready to use kind of thing? I know temperature and stuff makes a difference in bacteria.
Like to start a fresh one?
Yeah, so I just recently started my fresh one again.
Yeah.
And it's only been a week or two.
Yeah.
So how long, or should I do the water test, or?
Do the rubber band test.
Oh, it's rising.
Oh, then it's
Yeah.
probably good. And how
Okay.
long have you, for a week you've
Yeah.
started? Yeah, then it's probably
Okay.
good to go. You'll find out if you bake bread.
Okay.
So have you done pizza dough with sour?
Yeah.
Yeah, so no different, just same process?
Yeah, it's just the time, right? Like you're not gonna have pizza dough in 2 hours.
Are you gonna stretch out your pizza dough and then leave it to proof before, and like stretch it into the shape you want, then leave it to proof, or do you just stretch it out and then put the seasoning? The
Yeah,
sauce
with
in?
doughs like that don't need to go in this whole like final rise,
Yeah.
then I just take it out and maybe make little, like even with bagels, I would take it out of this after like the fermentation. I take it out, cut it up into 8 pieces,
Yeah.
and just kind of roll them on the counter with a little bit of, so the countertop is kind of floured, and then I just give it another moment there, and then I would come back and I'd roll it out,
Okay.
right, for a pizza. I can't believe I almost forgot to give you bread.
And you do
So
find that
these are
people
the-
with gluten sensitivities can have it?
And then that like, kinda like that elasticy, that's kinda what you want. Sorry?
You do find that people with gluten sensitivities can still have, like even the non-organic?
Yeah, I've had lots of people say they're fine with sourdough bread.
Okay.
Yeah. But I guess everyone, I don't feel as, you know, like an example, right? Like today, we had to go to a hockey game really early, we didn't eat anything, and then we ate something horrible at A&W. It's like still on my, you know, and that's like the carbs that are like the bad. I never feel like that after a piece of sourdough bread. So that's just how I tell, but I have no sensitivity. But I can tell a little difference from the things we eat here since we've moved from Switzerland, because I just think the regulations in Europe are a little different of how they're allowed to grow wheat, right?
Yes,
So
very much.
that's
You-
kind of
You moved from where?
Switzerland. Switzerland,
Oh, Switzerland.
yeah. Okay, please come and grab some. Keep cutting here.
Does anybody have any other questions? Because I'm actually gonna stop recording, but any other questions at all? No? All right.